basically. So, for a panel on shifting crypto regulation, latest developments and trends, please put your hands together for our moderator, Victoria, and we have Jawna and Jawna. Sorry about that. Jawna Standish and Jawna Sevinc.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. How are you feeling after 2 intense days full of educational and inspirational content and a great night out partying yesterday in Barcelona? I think we have the tough challenge to, in the next 45 minutes, to talk about something not many of us like to talk about. It's kind of like the evil thing in the room, regulation. I have 2 amazing people here who know a lot about regulation. I myself, Victoria, I come from policy. I have an economics background. And 5 years ago, after going through, different institutions, I was like, no, we have to rethink of how we work, rethink institutions. That was what got me into DAOs and Web3. So, but I give the word to my 2 panelists here to introduce themselves and also maybe kick it off when asking, why do you think that particularly in the last year, the pace of regulation and the talk and the intensity we feel has picked up?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jawna Standish, and I'm with a company called MyDAO, and we provide legal entity solutions for Web3 projects in the Marshall Islands. And I'm also part of Bankless DAO. I'm one of the ombuds there. And I'm part of FTW DAO, which also Victoria is as well, which is a venture capital DAO. And do you want to give an introduction to and then answer the question?
Yeah, sure. My name is Jawna, and I'm regulatory counsel to Wirex. Wirex is essentially a crypto payment company that integrates traditional payment rails into crypto. We also have DeFi products like non-custodial wallets, which you can, mint bridge your NFTs and keep your assets safely with your own control. It's a global company working in different regulation under different regulations in US, Europe, UK, APAC, even in Australia. So, and I'm responsible from keeping it afloat. So this is pretty much where my background is.
And so maybe going back to the question, why do we feel the weight of regulation laying into this industry so much over the last couple of months? What are your thoughts and takes on that?
Maybe I can, take that. I think crypto has been here almost over 10 years, right? And the idea of blockchain and idea of it is even longer. But why we started to talk about crypto now? I think as financial impacts of crypto is getting more severe, now we are taking more attention from both regulators, policymakers, even politicians, and I think not only it's because we now started to create robust frameworks for crypto like we have in the EU, but also politicians and policymakers starting to draw attention into that, and that's why I think it's also right time for crypto to speak about regulation, because I think the mass adoption and an average Joe becoming interested in crypto would only come if regulation comes in. This is the only way.
I agree with you. And I think also the other reason why there's so much attention on this right now is because the opportunity is so huge and massive. And that's when policymakers, politicians, and people around the world pay attention, because right now you can see that central banks are threatened by this, sovereign nations are threatened by this, and so people are paying attention. And some jurisdictions are having a more of a hostile approach to this, like the United States, I think is a good example for a hostile approach, where they're not participating in the rule of law and proactive policy making. They're just going after projects and saying, you know, we accuse you of unregistered securities, you're a criminal, you have a civil case against you. So this is what's happening, and if you look back in history, like with mobile technology, for example, you know, it's hard to tell the mix of age range in the audience, but for example, text messaging was around for like 15 years before it became mainstream. Why is that? There was a huge opportunity, and mobile operators around the world noticed that, and as such, regulation had to be put in place. The same with like location-based services with mobile technology. At first, that was illegal, it was considered dangerous, and now look at all of us. We walk around with our phone like glued to our hands, and same thing, regulation had to be put in place and harmonized around the world. But I think with crypto and blockchain specifically, the opportunity is so massive, and it has the potential to change the way we do everything.
Yeah.
Banking, absolutely everything. And I think this is exciting, and it's also scary, I think, to a lot of regulators, because we don't yet know what we don't know, and we don't yet know all of the unintended consequences. So I think that's why there's so much attention on this.
Absolutely. I would even argue that, like, in policymaking, you always speak about like those windows of opportunity that open. And with elections coming up in the US, with elections coming up in the EU, there are policy windows closing, or also, I think, a lot of the steam in the US, when I want to be like a little cynical, I say like it's also triggered with like the intensity of the campaigning coming up, right? So
Absolutely.
there is a lot of fuss going on, and you're like, okay, because I think when we see regulators, like regulators are always like put together with like the bureaucrats and the institutions and the politicians, and they function in different cycles and mindsets.
Yeah.
And but yeah, maybe before we go into like, okay, who are the actual stakeholders? Let's think of, and you also touched on it briefly. What would you say might be? Is there a right balance of regulation? Can there be?
Not because I'm a regulatory lawyer, but also from a personal perspective, I definitely believe there is a right balance. Because yes, when we are regulating a new topic, we always think about, okay, is it going to kill innovation or not?
Yeah.
So, but when you're maybe trying too hard to not to kill the innovation, you create flaws that companies like obvious, FTX or others could find their ways around, seen as regulated, but not providing right assurance to the customers as well. So I think when it comes to that, there is a right balance, and we are going there. But this will only come with an experience. You know, I think it's so normal to have a couple of incidents before you find the right balance. But I think we are nearly getting there. Now we have different approaches tried. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work. So I think from regulatory example point of view, Japan example was very important on FTX. So among many subsidiaries of FTX, Japan was so fast, could confirm that all funds are safe and anyone can get all their assets, all their funds, because they had a working solution, while some of the other jurisdictions that FTX was licensed couldn't. So I think that was one of the good examples of how regulation can help us going through that. And of course, I think there is it's yet to be developed. We are not there yet, but we are going there slowly. This is my point of view. And MiCA in Europe is, I think, a great step towards that, and probably impact the business and industry in general in a substantial manner.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it better myself. I think there can be a balance, and I think if we look back through history, that's the thing. Most of us have short memories, but if you look throughout history, in the end, for the most part, regulation has always harmonized really with innovation, and it's not really stifled it. And I think, like you were saying, in the beginning, maybe we make some mistakes, it's not perfect, but I think we have to remember that we're still in the early days. Like, even though this has been around for 10 years, even though these big DeFi protocol projects have, you know, billions and billions of total value locked, for example, we're still very much in the early days, because if you go out and walk on the street, or if you ask your mother or your aunt or someone, if they know about crypto, for example, I guarantee you that their initial reaction to the word crypto is negative, right? So that's like a whole other subject that I think our industry needs to address to change the narrative, and also to share examples of really practical use cases of how blockchain and crypto could help just mainstream life. Yeah. And I think if we focus on things like that more, as opposed to, you know, finding the criminals and the bad actors, because there'll always be criminals and bad actors since the beginning of time, and there will always be. So yeah, I do think there can be harmonization, and I just think it's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Maybe just the last bit to add in here, by the nature of the crypto, it can go anywhere, right? So if you push in one simple jurisdiction, you're also pushing people to go away, and we see that now companies are leaving US. Now we see even VCs, investors are moving their office to Europe or London instead of US. So by the nature, there is actually a risk on losing the opportunity while you're trying to be too tight. I'm not an advocate for keeping it too light, but I think that's where the magic will happen when we find the right balance.
Yeah, I think you touched on one thing very concrete. So regulation, in a sense, like, it's a piece of text, right? Yeah. Let's just say it's a piece of text. So how do we apply that piece of text? How do we ensure that companies and projects are prepared to interpret it in the right way, to be compliant with it? So what do these new regulations, what are the challenges that they bring?
I think the biggest challenge is education, making sure that people understand. And I don't know if you experienced this, Jawna, but even I mentioned this yesterday, like 10 years ago, or maybe longer now, people started to just Google if their leg hurt or their ear hurt or something like this. And instead of going to the doctor, they would just Google doctor the approach, right? And they would decide if they would actually go to see a doctor based on what search result. People are doing similar things like that right now with legal matters, which I find both positive and negative, because it's very risky. But I think, to answer your question about interpretation, is all going to be about having educational platforms and access for people so that they can understand what these regulations are about and how they help them, and what sort of guardrails they have in place. And I think it's going to be the lawyers in this space that really get behind this, and also all of us, right? Like, a lot of us have much more experience now on the legal side of things, as opposed to like a few years ago when maybe we knew nothing about this, but the current environment has sort of forced all of us to get smarter about this. But my biggest concern at the moment is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. And, the best way to address that, I don't have the answers, other than I know that education is always the right medium, and then how we get that to the people is, to be determined.
Yeah, I think definitely these are the most important challenges before having a right attitude and understanding of a regulation. But I think we need also more people involved into policy making, involved into regulatory compliance. Because when you look at, for example, Klarna's business, it actually started from an interpretation of a legislative piece, and it was there for years. And somebody looked at it and saw an opportunity, said that, I'm going to create a business. And they just create $1 billion business out of it. So when we look at the pieces and tags, so when we don't know the operational side, when we don't know the real practical side, this text doesn't really mean anything. So more people involved in the operation, more people understanding what is really the essence of crypto, DeFi, or any related blockchain topic. If they can get more interest into text, I think we will create way better solutions and understanding out of these regulations. Because as it takes for a lawyer who's not involved into the business, into the blockchain, it doesn't really mean anything. You know, it's just another piece of paper. But like for a new innovative area, I think more people who has experience and knowledge about the industry itself should be more interested in regulation to make it really meaningful for a wider crowd.
Yeah. I think, so also when applying, one of the questions that is like, kind of like hanging over this industry, right, is it a security? And when I talk to people, like even like when going out in bars or yesterday night, it's like, well, but you know, our project, we're like, could we be interpreted as a security? What happens if we are? And why does this one question, why does this one word, how many letters is it? 7, if I haven't got it misspelled Friday morning. So why do those 7 letters matter so much?
In my humble opinion, I think because of what's happening in the US and what we see the SEC doing and coming after big projects, I think this is instilling the fear of God in most of us. But what I want to say here is not legal advice, but it's legal information. And I think people shouldn't be afraid of their token being a security. And I'll tell you why. In some cases, it is a security, and in some cases it's not. But if it is a security and you're registered, for example, as a for-profit DAO LLC, just as an example, there are exemptions in every jurisdiction in the world around securities. So there's the possibility to be exempt for like up to $20 million. And so I think if more people knew like that little detail, just as an example, people would stop trying to like hide and shoehorn themselves into a project that's not really what they're about. And that's when I think people misstep and make the wrong choices, and they circumvent going to like smart lawyers that would advise them to do otherwise.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest fear people have around being a security is they don't want to get in trouble, and they don't want to be, you know, they don't want a regulator coming after them, accusing them of selling unlicensed securities, because that's, in a lot of jurisdictions, it's a crime. In some cases, it's a civil case, but nobody wants to be tangled up in that. And I think that's the biggest concern. And I don't know what your comments would be about Europe, but I do think in the US, like, it's a bit ridiculous. Yeah. And what we see happening on a daily basis is like, they want to call everything a security.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's such a loaded question.
Maybe kind of before you start answering the question on security, allow me to give you another thought. I think securities is often like defined like in the text of financial law and banking law. And since you're based in the UK, and in the UK, was it this week or last week, there was all this talk about like this, finally, like after over a decade, there is like this new banking law, and it is like maybe giving an upwind to the UK. So maybe you can float it in your answer.
Yeah, sure. I definitely agree with you. It's like being security, it almost seems like, okay, that's a stigmata, but it's not. It's actually not. It's just something that you need to, if your project is a security, then you just need to embrace it, and you just need to comply new laws coming with, it's a, there is a reason and consequences. It's simple as that from my perspective. But I think many big projects, although they have funds, although they have resources, they're just simply trying not or trying not to be seen as security while they essentially are. I think we very well passed the era that, or if it's on blockchain, it's not security. No, it's not like that. And nobody sees it like that. No regulator wants to see it like that. So I think if you have resources, I think being security is not really a big problem for you. For smaller projects, I understand this because it brings a lot of cost to your compliance. It brings a lot of cost to your operations, and I understand the urge to not to fall within the security laws, which you can do that. You just need to arrange, organize your project around that. So this is pretty much what I see about that, and I definitely agree that it's becoming a witch hunt in US rather than having an appropriate approach. And in the UK, I think we have a very mixed approach. While the politicians are saying that, oh yeah, UK is going to lead and pioneer finance in the Europe, and we're going to make this. And then you see a consultation paper saying that, oh yeah, crypto must be regulated as gambling. So I think there are maybe it's good to have different opinions from different parts of the policy making process. But I'm not sure to what extent the politic statements will effectively happen 100%, as they say. Because the biggest problem around that is, I think, the regulators or watchdogs, they press for tighter security, while politicians are trying to be seen more like, yes, if you're having problem in the US, you can come to UK. We have a good experience in regulating complex financial instruments, which they have in. I think London and UK has the best experience in regulating complex financial structures. But the way they approach to crypto has been a little bit conflicting and mixed so far. We hope to see, and we also started to see a more sustainable approach on now marketing, and then the other rules about the stable coins are coming, gradually increasing the regulatory framework in a sustainable manner, which is, I think, making so much sense to me in that sense.
Yeah, and can I just add something too, like maybe a question to the audience? Is anybody here involved in a DAO or want to be involved in a DAO? Okay.
Yes.
I think that on a daily basis, we're all getting smarter about just everything, like what's happening, the technology, the legal side of things. And I'll give an example, like in one of the DAOs that I'm involved in, we had these amazing contributors that one of them pulled out from being a multi-sig because our DAO didn't have a legal entity. And this person said, hey, with the case with, I don't know how familiar you are with the OkiDAO case, but what happened was they didn't have the appropriate legal wrapper for their project. And if you don't have that, and you're a group of people that come together for a common cause, it could be a book club, it could be anything. People that, like a group of you that like to go walking, and then maybe you buy water bottles for people. And anytime you come together for a common purpose, a group of people, and there isn't a legal entity, whether we like it or not, in the eyes of the law, you are treated as a general partnership. And when that happens, every single one of you, and me, and you, we are all held individually liable for whatever that group does. And that's a very risky proposition. And so I'm starting to see more people, like really amazing, brilliant people, forego important roles in DAOs because there isn't a legal framework in place. So people are getting smarter now to ask these questions. I think even like 2 years ago or 3 years, like I didn't ask the question either. Like it wasn't the first top of mind. And so my point there is just that I think this is going to become more and more important. Otherwise, yeah, we have brain drain from countries, but we're going to have people not wanting to participate in really important projects because the proper structure isn't in place, and you know, there's a fear of getting in trouble or being involved with people that we don't really know who they are. They're just somebody in a Discord server. So just to add to your point, like, I think this is another reason why these things are so important, because we talk about like inclusivity and inviting people into this space. We also need to make it safe so that people want to come here. So I just think that's an important point.
Yeah, and I think the biggest, one of the biggest concerns about attacks when they you know, get involved in DAOs, because this uncertainty is keeping a lot of people away. I think that while some of the jurisdictions are moving ahead with tax clarity on DAOs, they will have probably the competitive advantage when it comes to regulating.
I really like what you were saying, Jawna. Like, and yesterday there was this talk about the web of trust. And you know, they did experiments of like, how do we trust people like that they're coming? And I think when thinking about like all the regulatory developments, it's like in an ideal world, like the regulation that we're having and how we're implying is like something that is creating trust. It's creating trust for investors, for consumers, but also businesses in operating, right? So, and I really liked what you said, because I think it's like, it's a new industry. Regulatory efforts are picking up, and slowly we have to figure out a way of how we can create trust that like this piece of text that is coming out has the good intentions for the ecosystem, right? And I think some jurisdictions are doing quite well or better than others, but some are also hard, because generally part of blockchain and the philosophy is also, like our philosophy in Web3 is that trust is eroding everywhere, right? Yeah. And those are the institutions that should give us back. So would you have so what's your viewpoint on the challenge of how these institutions can, you know, recharge their battery of trust, their foundation of trust that they have been losing across industry, but particularly in this industry that also in our roots started of like saying something has to change. We need to have to rethink our systems.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. I don't really have the perfect answer, but I would just say all of us are here because we want to see something different happen in the world. Maybe, you know, maybe some people came from working in like traditional office environments or just all different backgrounds. And I think it starts with us, right? Like, we're going to be the ones that welcome people in. We're going to be the ones that, you know, instill that trust. And then I think it's like, I don't like to use the word hierarchy, but in a way it's a hierarchy, because then we're going to have to partner with legislators and we're going to have to partner with policymakers, and we can't let those things happen in a vacuum. Otherwise, we won't have the rule of law. We'll just have politicians saying, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and we won't have any participation. So I don't really have I don't know the answer. That's why I'm here. I'm in search of that answer. And hoping to partner with all of you to try to find like a welcoming space, in a space that at least I feel comfortable in a space that I feel comfortable welcoming like former colleagues, friends, family, and people that I see are typically left out and left behind. I like to include them, invite them into this space, because I hope that it will become even more and more inclusive and have like a fertile environment for this type of space, really. So I guess I put the pressure on you to answer it.
Yeah, just like you, I don't have the perfect answer either, to be honest. But so when you look at what really brings the trust in general industry or regulation or a specific jurisdiction, is very complex. You know, it could be the regulator itself, it could be politicians, it could be also some of the you know, influential institutions in the country. When you look at the trends, you know, there was a trend going, or for example, registering in a crypto exchange company in Estonia, and they registered 200 companies, and then they're now delisting 170 of them because they didn't think it through. They didn't think that they could. They thought that they could manage it, but they simply couldn't. So I think not just having, say, or positioning yourself as like a trusted part or jurisdiction is not enough. It needs to be a very complex and couple of other conditions should come together in order to create this.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that's going to help is time, right? Because even when you meet someone new for the first time, how do you trust them? And in my opinion, I mean, this is just my opinion, but it takes time. You need to see like patterns of behavior. You need to see consistency. You need to see people following through on their word. And I'm not exactly sure how that's going to apply in the context of like blockchain, but I think it's similar because as long as humans are part of this whole project, if you will, I think it's going to be the same, and it will just take some time to see those patterns play out, really.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I, as I said, like yesterday, this trust issue, when listening to the talk, it came up, where it was like, okay, but how could we help? I think I personally want to be hopeful, also because I think I'm starting to see and observing the policy and regulatory space in crypto. I'm starting to see that some of those institutions and governments that have always, they're like, we have done it always that way, why should we change? Are starting to rethink their approaches, like starting the way of how they do consultation in the UK has evolved slowly. Then there are countries like Hong Kong and Dubai that have announced a couple of months ago, hey, we want to collaborate on that issue. The Marshall Islands, where you are doing the work with MIDAO, where the government openly invited you and said, like, look, let's team up on this and figure out of how we can create the first framework for DAOs, right? So I think there is a slow change of mindset, and it's really hard to break habits. I mean, all of us know when we are like, okay, in January, we're like, okay, this is like my New Year's resolution, and then 14 days later, it's like all gone. So I also think it's for government a little bit of like doing that, but seeing those little happenings and changes of behavior, what is your view, or what would you say could spark more international collaboration and this also maybe potential for iterative approaches that are collaborative in inviting people in?
So I think I definitely agree with you. Some of the countries, they just come up with some pieces. Some of them are just inviting big companies. We see that in Bahrain, they're just inviting Binance into that and saying that just guide us. How we gonna pioneer this? But I think for international cooperation, we are still in the very early stages. We don't. I can't see anything more than consultation papers, flying around between institutions, but I haven't seen really a good cooperation. There are very general framework cooperations. I think Singapore had recently between UK, and UK had between EEA on general financial services. But I think for crypto-specific ones, we are still very, very early, I could say. But we see a consistent approach in some regulations, which is like travel rule, for example. We see almost the same approach from different jurisdictions, including Dubai, EU, UK, because it's FATF driven. So I think the industry players like FATF or for other international organizations, they have chance to bring that, but we are not there yet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you look at the G7, these are the countries that are most opposing all of this, right? Because they control the global economy. They control the central banks, they control the flow of means in production, and they invented the legacy rails in banking legislation that we all operate on today. So I feel like it will come over time, but it's all the other countries that are not in the G7 see this as a massive opportunity. And I find that exciting, and I hope that countries like, in the G7 eventually, I think it will come and that we'll get there. But I think it's going to be smaller countries first that embrace this opportunity, because these types of opportunity come around only once every 100 years. And I think the countries that have been, I'll just say, haven't had such a position, like in the G7, for example, I think they see it as an opportunity. And some countries are embracing it and doing a great job. And even countries like the Marshall Islands, for example, we partnered with them. They have a long and storied, rich history in shipping and maritime and logistics industries. Like 1 out of every 5 ships in the world is registered in the Marshall Islands. 50 companies split between the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange are registered in the Marshall Islands. So it's a jurisdiction that has been around for a long time, has had a long and rich and prestigious reputation. But the country said, we also want to be a part of the new economy, because shipping and logistics might change 50 years from now. And so I think countries like this that are a little bit more forward-thinking and willing to take a chance on these things, I find it encouraging, and I think it's a win for all of Web3 when you can get the support of a president, the cabinet, and the legislators to partner with you to help write that legislation. So I'm hopeful. I'm like you. I'm hopeful, and I agree with Jawna that it's the early days still.
Yeah. I see on the monitor that there were a couple of questions from the audience, so I would suggest we turn to that. And I just start with the top that has been upvoted quite a bit. So, do you think that regulations could be a setback for crypto in the near future, as a time horizon 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, maybe I can, take that. Maybe I don't know if it's right to call it a setback, but I think we will see a consolidation period for crypto companies. While we will see probably considerably smaller projects and considerably smaller companies will need to merge to handle the costs coming with the regulation. We have seen similar examples. Some of the companies they stopped due to upcoming regulatory obstacles that they couldn't be able to afford that, basically. So I think it will definitely drive relatively smaller companies into mergers or finding solutions, because also we know that investment is not in the best phase right now. So I wouldn't call it a setback, but I think there will be an era that we will see lots of mergers or coming together in order to afford upcoming regulatory costs.
Yeah, and I would even add, I don't know what your opinion is on this, but I see a lot of Web3 lawyers do what's been done for over 50 years now. Is there's a lot of legal arbitrage going on where projects have several legal jurisdictions to cover all of the activities that they're doing. So in my opinion, my humble opinion, I think that there has always been this option, and I think there will always be this option. So projects that have the funding to do these types of legal maneuvers, I think they'll do them. And then the ones that don't, I agree with Jawna, like there'll be more like roll-ups and collaborations and mergers, maybe not the word, but projects will collapse or be consumed by other bigger projects.
Yeah. I wonder, like, maybe sticking with that just for a second. So, setback for the industry potential as a business, or would you also argue a setback in terms of adoption of crypto? Because, like, in theory, the regulation should give more security to investors and consumers, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that in general it will create a setback for adoption. I think the biggest challenge, regulation itself is one of the biggest challenges before the mass adoption. My father doesn't invest in crypto unless he understands if there is a regulation or rules around that. So I think regulation itself has a bigger impact than these mergers or smaller companies needing to come together to cover the costs.
Okay, wonderful. Maybe going over to the next question. That's so, Jawna, how can DAOs secure their IP rights?
Yeah, so that's pretty straightforward. So if a DAO has a legal entity and the legal entity that they choose has legislation that covers this, like for a DAO LLC, for example, in the Marshall Islands, anything that you would put in your operating agreement, which is really the legal framework for your project, most of that comes from your DAO governance structure. So you would put that under the umbrella of your, like in this case, a DAO LLC. So I see lots of DAOs, like they all have IP, they have dApps, they have websites, right, that they're using to attract users or contributors. And I also see lots of DAO projects just have one legal umbrella, and then I see ones that sort of containerize the different functions of their project. Like maybe the treasury is in one legal entity, and the IP and the real estate are in another one. And it really just depends on the complexity of like what that project is trying to achieve, and also what type of relationships it might want to have and it might need to have with other legal entities. Like to run any company or project, you're going to need like SaaS subscriptions, right? Like we all use Gmail and Notion and Calendly and all these types of tools, right? And we pay for them with a credit card, right? So if a DAO wants to have these types of services to help run its project, you don't want to have an individual member of the DAO paying for those things with their credit card, because the obvious reason, what happens if you get into an argument with you or they go rogue, they can just pull the plug on the whole project. So like little things like this, and I don't know, Jawna, if you want to comment on something else there.
No, I think you pretty much covered everything, 10 out of 10.
So there is another question, and I think it's also a good way to wrap up like our conversation, is like, how can you guarantee that regulation is actually representative for the ecosystem, and that their representatives are represented inside the ecosystem? So what are, and kind of like the aspirational things, like how can we ensure this and make it better?
So I think it goes back to the topic that who is actually involved into policy making and regulations. So if it's people from the industry, I think, yes, we can. But there is no way to guarantee that. I don't think that anyone could. But only way to achieve this is real, industry, individuals coming into policy making, coming into the regulatory perspective, effectively responding to consultations. So, for example, in the UK, we have like some groups like Crypto UK or like Finance UK. So we come together, we bring our brains together, we try to just write back to every consultation to possibly affect any upcoming regulations. Of course, yeah. So I think this is the only way that we can guarantee, if we ever can.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree completely and say, even if you find this topic boring, maybe if there's a tiny piece of you that's a little interested, you should get involved. There's so many projects, there's so many groups, there's like Blockchain Association. In every jurisdiction in the world, there's a group that you can find that participates in influencing policy.
And I would also add, like, go and find your local representatives in government and just try and talk to them and try to make them listen, because also they have to start coming into this industry and listening. That's their job, to listen.
Absolutely. They will come and invite you to have a conversation with them. So you should definitely do it.
Okay, I think our time is up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you,
guys, for
Victoria.
listening
Thanks,
to
everyone.
45
Yeah.
Thanks,
minutes.
everyone.